More breaking news here in New York, where the notorious Gilgo Beach serial killer case has finally come to a close.
These young women went missing between July of 2007 and September of 2010. For the next 13 years, their cases went unsolved.
He attended the community meetings. Think about that for a moment. After bodies started turning up along the beaches of Long Island, after the neighborhood was terrified and investigators were struggling and families were demanding answers,
this is the perfect place to dump a body.
I found another one. 3 more really scared me.
Body count, body count, body count.
People in our area are starting to get nervous.
We're anxious to have this over with.
Rex Heuermann sat in those meetings.
Rex Heuermann is now in custody.
He listened to investigators describe the investigation. He heard his neighbors express their fear. He was a respected Manhattan architect, a family man, a homeowner who lived 15 miles from the crime scenes. And he sat in those rooms, and he listened. And he was the one they were all looking for. We are going to come back to those community meetings, because they are the most chilling detail in a case full of chilling details. This is the Gilgo Beach murders. The case that began with a missing woman exploded into the discovery of 11 sets of remains along a remote Long Island highway, and went cold for over a decade while the man responsible drove past the search sites, went to work in Manhattan, and came home to suburban Massapequa Park. In 2023, a piece of leftover pizza changed everything. In April 2026, Rex Heuermann pleaded guilty to killing 8 women. In June 2026, he was sentenced to life without parole. The case took 13 years to close. The killer lived 15 miles away the entire time. It started with a missing woman who wasn't one of his victims. May 1st, 2010, 4:51 a.m. A 24-year-old escort named Shannon Gilbert placed a panicked 911 call from a client's home in Oak Beach. She told the dispatcher someone was after her. She ran out into the darkness of the barrier island, banging on neighbors' doors, screaming. She disappeared into the marsh. When her mother pushed police to search for her, officers sent a canine unit to comb the area around Ocean Parkway. On December 11, 2010, 8 months into the search, the dog found something in the brush, not Shannon Gilbert. The first set of remains, wrapped in burlap, belonged to Melissa Barthélemy, 24. Within days, 3 more sets of remains were found within a half-mile of each other along Ocean Parkway. Megan Waterman, 22. Amber Lynn Costello, 27. Maureen Brainerd Barnes, 25. All 4 women had advertised escort services on Craigslist. All 4 were found bound, wrapped in burlap or belted at the head, midsection, and legs. They became known as the Gilgo 4. Over the following months, the search widened. By April 2011, 11 sets of remains had been found along the parkway and surrounding areas. Some remains were linked to cases from 1993 and 1996 that had never been connected to the same perpetrator. Long Island had been a dumping ground for years. Nobody had noticed. The Suffolk County Police Commissioner announced publicly that the same person may be responsible. The word serial killer entered the conversation. And then, the investigation went quiet. For over a decade, no suspect was publicly named. No arrest was made. The bodies had been identified. The case had not been solved. And somewhere 15 miles away, a man was going to work and coming home to his family. The women he targeted shared a single vulnerability. They advertised on Craigslist, which in the mid-2000s was the primary platform through which sex workers connected with clients. It meant they were accustomed to meeting strangers. It meant their appointments were difficult to trace. And it meant that in an era before widespread digital surveillance, a careful man who paid cash and used burner phones could move through their lives without leaving a trail. After Amber Costello disappeared in September 2010, her roommate gave police a description of the client and the car he drove, a first-generation Chevrolet Avalanche. That detail would sit in a police file for over a decade. We'll come back to it. Why did the case go cold? The honest answer is several reasons at once. No crime scenes, no murder weapon. Remains that had been exposed to the elements for years made forensic evidence degraded and difficult to use. Victims who were stigmatized by their profession meant that initial investigations received less urgency than they deserved.
Please keep in mind that this is not an episode of CSI. This is an intensive, long-term investigation.
And a killer who knew exactly what he was doing. He strangled them. He dismembered some of their bodies. He wrapped them in burlap. He disposed of them on a remote stretch of highway between barrier beaches, where bodies could decompose for years without being found. He had been operating since at least 1993 and was never on any list of suspects. He attended neighborhood meetings about his own murders. The case needed a new approach. It took until January 2022 for the Suffolk County District Attorney to convene a dedicated multi-agency task force. Before we get into how investigators identified Rex Heuermann and the single most ordinary piece of evidence used to crack a serial murder case in modern history, I want to ask for 5 seconds of your time. Cases like this one deserve sustained attention, not just a viral moment. If you want to go deeper on cases like Gilgo Beach, subscribing helps this channel reach more people who care. Now, back to Long Island. And a Chevrolet Avalanche that a task force detective remembered after 12 years. Rex Andrew Heuermann was born in 1963 in Massapequa Park, Long Island, the same town he lived in his entire life, including the day he was arrested. He grew up there. He attended local schools. He went into architecture. By the time the Gilgo Four were discovered, he was a successful architectural consultant whose firm had worked on projects in Midtown Manhattan. He commuted by train. He had a wife, a daughter, a stepson. The house he lived in had belonged to his mother, whom he purchased it from in 1994. Neighbors noticed it growing increasingly dilapidated over the years, the yard overgrown, the exterior crumbling, in contrast to the well-maintained homes around it. Inside, investigators would later find over 200 firearms. The question this case forces you to confront is not the one most people ask. How did he do it? The question is, how did a man who had been doing this for 30 years never once become a suspect? And the answer tells you everything about how we prioritize who we're afraid of. On his devices, investigators found evidence of what prosecutors called a planning document, a written strategy for future killings, including how to dispose of a body, how to avoid apprehension, and how not to leave DNA. He had searched violent torture pornography extensively. He had used burner phones and a fake identity to contact victims. He had maintained an AOL email account and a Tinder profile under an alias. His wife and children were out of state, provably, documentably out of state, on every occasion when a killing is believed to have occurred. He had planned around his family's absences. This was not impulsive. This was managed, sustained, deliberate, for 30 years. In January 2022, the new task force went back to the beginning. 6 weeks in, a detective cross-referenced the Amber Costello witness description with vehicle registration databases. The first-generation Chevrolet Avalanche matched a truck registered to Rex Heuermann. He lived 15 miles from Gilgo Beach. He was the right age. He fit the physical description witnesses had provided. Task force investigators began quietly building a case around him, pulling his cell phone location data, his credit card records, his internet search history. they found something investigators described as extraordinary. Huerman's phone had pinged in the same location as multiple victims right before they disappeared. He had been Googling the Gilgo Beach investigation obsessively, checking news about the task force, about new evidence, about how close they were to him. He was tracking how close they were. Now they needed his DNA. The problem: you cannot compel someone to provide DNA without probable cause to arrest them. So investigators did what the Golden State Killers detectives had done a few years earlier. They waited. They followed him through Midtown Manhattan where he worked. On January 26, 2023, Huerman finished his lunch, a box of pizza, and threw the leftover crusts into a sidewalk garbage can. A surveillance team moved in. They retrieved the box. The crime lab extracted DNA from a crust. They compared it to a male hair found on burlap used to restrain one of the victims. It matched. A piece of pizza crust. The forensic breakthrough in one of the longest-running serial murder investigations in New York history came down to a piece of pizza crust that a man threw away on his way back to his office. July 13, 2023. Rex Huerman was arrested outside his Manhattan office. He was charged with 3 murders. Prosecutors named him a prime suspect in a 4th. The next day, in tears in a courtroom, his attorney told the press, "The only thing I can tell you that he said, as he was in tears, was, 'I didn't do this.'" Over the following months, investigators added more charges. The search of his home uncovered what prosecutors described as an arsenal. His wife filed for divorce within months. He was charged with 7 murders. He admitted to 8. The 8th victim, Karen Vergata, he was never formally charged with killing, but he admitted it in court anyway. For almost 3 years, Huerman maintained his innocence. His defense team fought to suppress the DNA evidence, arguing investigators had violated his privacy by taking his garbage without consent. The judge ruled against them. Then, on April 8, 2026, exactly 1,000 days after his arrest, Rex Huerman walked into a Suffolk County courtroom and pleaded guilty to 7 murders. He also admitted in court to an 8th he had never been charged with. He stood before the judge and spoke the names of his victims one by one. The families of those women, who had waited more than a decade for this moment, sat in the gallery and listened to the man who had taken their daughters, their sisters, their mothers say, out loud, that he did it. "There are no words I can say," he told the court afterward. "The words I would say have no meaning." On June 17, 2026, State Supreme Court Justice Timothy Mazzei sentenced Rex Huerman to life in prison without the possibility of parole. The families addressed him one by one. Melissa Bartholomew's sister called him an ogre, a demon, a repulsive monster, and said, "I hope you take a spot in hell." Jessica Taylor's cousin said, "A million years isn't enough." When the judge asked Huerman if he was sorry, he said yes. The judge was unmoved. "You are a disgusting, despicable, and small man, and you are a coward," Justice Mazzei said before imposing the sentence. Rex Huerman's sentences were ordered to run consecutively. He will die in prison. At the start of this video, I asked you to hold on to the image of Rex Huerman sitting in those community meetings, listening to the investigation he was the subject of, surrounded by the neighbors he'd lived among his whole life. Here is what that image actually represents. Rex Huerman grew up in Massapequa Park. He bought his childhood home. He went to the local high school. He was woven into the fabric of this community for 60 years. And for at least 30 of those years, he was strangling women and dumping their bodies 15 miles from where he slept. The community meetings weren't audacity, they were camouflage. He sat in those rooms because a man who doesn't attend the community meeting about the local serial killer becomes conspicuous. He was never conspicuous. He was always there. That is the most frightening thing about Rex Huerman. Not what he did in the dark, but how well he functioned in the light. The investigation into the Gilgo Beach murders is not fully closed. Other remains found along Ocean Parkway have not been connected to Huerman. The cases of Shannon Gilbert, whose disappearance started all of this, and others remain open. 8 victims confirmed. An unknown number may still be unaccounted for. Melissa Barthelemy was 24. Megan Waterman was 22. Amber Lynn Costello was 27. Maureen Brainerd Barnes was 25. Jessica Taylor was 20. Valerie Mack was 24. Sandra Costilla was 28. Karen Vergata was 34. They had families. They had children. They had futures that were taken from them on a remote stretch of Long Island Highway. And they waited over a decade for their names to be said in a courtroom with a consequence attached. They finally got that. It took a pizza crust. And it took 13 years, but it happened.